Hi everyone, we're so glad that you've joined us here at Hope Church Online today, and we want to say a huge happy Mother's Day to all you mums out there, and to you ladies too. We want you to know that we love you and appreciate you, and thank you so much for all that you are and all that you do for every single one of us. Today we're going to have a few different things happening today, and we're going to look back at this past 12 months. As we all know, it's been quite a different year, and we're just going to take a glimpse at what it's looked like in your life as a family over the last 12 months. And then after that, we're going to be hearing the Word of God today from Carly Butler, who with her husband John, they're planting a church in Aberystwyth. So sit back and relax and let God speak to you today.
Welcome. You're so welcome here today. You feeling welcomed? I'm sure you are. It's been amazing, hasn't it? We're just so glad that you've joined us today, whether it's here in the building or whether it's online. We're so glad that you're here. Today I'm going to talk about the theme of being blessed, but we've seen so much already about that, haven't we? Unfortunately, I can't see all of your smiling faces, can I? So for my own encouragement today, I'm going to need you to bring a strong eyebrow game. So if you don't know what that is, even just a little raise when you're feeling excited, that would be great. That would really encourage me. If you can do more, one at a time, that would be even better. But, whatever you can do, that would be great. Actually, for some of us, hearing that word blessed this year, it's tough, isn't it? It's hard because it's been such a strange year. But for so many of us in this room who love Jesus, we know that we have been blessed. Actually, I was on a prayer Zoom the other day, and the guy that was leading it, he said this brilliant phrase, I've never heard it before, it's God's knee-jerk reaction to bless. I love that. It's God's knee-jerk reaction to bless. If you don't know a God today whose knee-jerk reaction is to bless, then I hope that we can introduce you to him. As we speak about being blessed, I wanted to introduce two important elements that are in my life, that are in a bit of my story that I'm going to share today. Two things that really impact the way that I look after my children, the way that I carry out in my one-to-one relationships as I lead, and can speak today, hopefully, about is grace and truth. So I wondered if we can turn in a Bible, if you've got one today, or look up on the screen, in John 1, verses 9 to 14. This passage from verse 1 is about Jesus, who he is, and what he came to do. But we're going to pick it up from verse 9. It says, "The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." So you see two things. First of all, for those who believe in his name, we have the right to become children of God. Welcomed into this family, and it is an amazing family to be part of. Secondly, we see a father who sent his son to make that possible and was full of grace and truth. The grace that Jesus offers us freely, and the truth that is spoken about in this passage so well. So I'm going to give you a bit of a revelation today, especially if you're under 15, because you've just heard about all these amazing grown-ups in this room and in your lives. So it might be a shocker. Brace yourself. None of us are perfect. Not you. You probably already know that. Not your brilliant mum, who you've talked about. Not your super sweet grandma. Not even your best friend. In fact, not even Jesus' mother, Mary, was perfect. Every single one of us humans have made mistakes because God gave us a choice. And with that choice, we have made some bad decisions, haven't we? I say that not just because it's what's in the Bible, but from my own personal experience. In the Bible, it talks about these mistakes as being called sin, and what God offers us is forgiveness. And it is so good to know when you are forgiven. And he doesn't just forgive, he offers us new life. So this morning we've been talking about blessed. And in Proverbs 31, there's a verse that's talking about this woman, and she's so highly esteemed. In verse 28, it says that her family and her children call her blessed. She really is living her best life. If you read Proverbs 31, you will be in awe of that. In verse 30, it tells us, this is because she knows the fear of the Lord. It says, charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting. Those are temporary things, aren't they? But she knows the fear of the Lord. She knows what it is to have. It's talking about respect and awe of who God is. She understands that she's forgiven and she's blessed because of the grace of God in her life and the truth that she carries in her heart. And today, we're going to look at that blessing coming through grace and truth. So, let's talk about grace. We desperately need God's grace because it's how we operate and rejoice that we're not constantly crippled by sin or fear, but we are rejoicing in what God does. If you haven't been in church your whole life, or actually, if today might be your first time in church, it's really easy to overlook the grace of God in your life. I just wanted to quickly clear up any sort of confusing language, because we talk about mercy and we talk about grace quite often hand in hand. Mercy, I found this definition, it's really good. Mercy defines the judgments that God withholds from us that we do deserve. Grace defines the blessings that God pours out on us that we do not deserve. Love is God's commitment to remain towards us a God of all mercy and all grace forever. What an amazing promise that is. And all of those things come to us through Jesus. So if you want to know how it looks in practice, here's some examples of God's grace. God's grace is so powerful that Peter, who was one of Jesus' best mates, would pretend to not know Jesus on the night he really needed him, the night he was sentenced to die. And then that same guy would go on to preach the gospel and kick off Christianity with over 3,000 converts just to get things going. God's grace is so powerful that Jesus would heal the ear of one of the soldiers who came to arrest him. God's grace is so powerful that he took a guy called Saul who was killing Christians. He appeared to him and then he enabled him to share the good news through Europe and Asia for starting the early church. God's grace is so powerful that I am no longer stuck in a mess of bad feelings and shame and guilt, but I can stand here in freedom today and preach to you. So what does God's grace look like for you? Even this week, where has God blessed you? I have so many blessings in my life, and it's definitely not because I've earned them or done everything right. Even though my kids might have seemed like that was the case this morning, it's definitely not. If you're hearing this news for the first time, I've got really, really great news for you. This grace is for you too. But what it isn't is it's not a free pass for sin. We have to understand the power of saying sorry. In the Bible, it calls repenting. It sounds super hard, but it's just turning back from our sin and asking for Jesus' forgiveness. When we do that, we know freedom and God pours out his blessing. So I thought I'd share a few snippets of my own story along the way this morning because I've known so much of God's grace in my life. I grew up in a chapel that my grandparents went to. It definitely had a bit of the Mount Sinai feel that Alan was talking about a couple of weeks ago. A lot of do's and don'ts, a lot of rights and wrongs, really big on God being quite strict, which as a child, it felt like there wasn't a huge amount of joy. But I kept going. I had some brilliant youth leaders who actually totally shone Jesus. I didn't really recognise that at the time. But at 16, I just decided I couldn't be one person with my grandparents on a Sunday and then someone totally different throughout the week. So I decided to leave. Needless to say, I didn't quite grasp the truth at that point. But when I left church, this was my big question. Why would this God have sent his son here for me? I didn't ask him to. Why am I being blamed? And what's it got to do with me? It just didn't make any sense. So I walked away. So here is the question, what's the truth? In fact, understanding the truth was later than I would have hoped for me. But the reality is sometimes we hear the truth, but we don't want to hear it. If I look back at verse 14 in the book of John, it says, "The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth." He's the one who was the Word put into skin. His name was Jesus, and he is the truth. He came so that we could know what it feels like and what it is to be in God's family, to really be there without sacrificing tons of goats and sheep all over the place. Instead, we get to walk in, and because of Jesus, we can be called blessed. We can know the grace of God. Do you know when Jesus walked the earth, he wasn't talking to people who just knew scriptures. He wasn't talking to people who knew Yahweh all the time. He was speaking also to Romans who worshipped all different gods. He was talking to people who had confusion about the truth. They had many gods, many afterlife ideas, and he spoke into those confusions. He spoke truth into those who twisted law. He spoke truth to those who didn't know law at all. He spoke it to those who were powerful and those who were in poverty and had lost all hope. He spoke truth even when it wasn't welcomed. And he spoke truth to answer the question that sits inside all of us. What is missing? What does not quite make sense about this life? I don't know if you've heard of C.S. Lewis. Most of you probably have. He's written some brilliant books, but one of them, Mere Christianity, he writes this line in it, and I absolutely love it. It says, if we find ourselves with a desire that nothing in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that we were made for another world. The truth is, we were made for another world. This world is temporary. If you're sat here today and you know Jesus, think about the first time you had that revelation. It might have been a person that talked to you, but it was the Holy Spirit that brought it to you. You might have heard the truth many, many times, but there was a moment when it clicked. It really clicked. And if you've never had that moment, the great news is I'm already praying for you to have that moment today, and I'm sure there are many here who are as well. For me, having that revelation came at the end of an Alpha course. Alpha is brilliant for all sorts of reasons, but the reason that I went was because my uni friend told me there was free food. And so I got a free meal week after week, and as a student, that was all you needed to get me there, really. That and the appeal of being able to ask lots of difficult questions, which I thought would be fun. And I did do that. I did enjoy my free meal and ask my difficult questions. But time and time again, as I went along, the people that were running this course, they showed me so much grace, but they kept on sticking to the truth of the Bible. And I started to see this consistent picture that I'd never seen before, that no matter what I read in the Bible, there was this plan of bringing people back to God. And I'd just never noticed it before. But actually, in the end, when I became a Christian at the end of that course, it was nothing to do with the big plan. It was all about me and Jesus. It was all about that relationship between me and him. It was completely personal. It was like a joy-filled, pain-filled peace as I was being prayed for. I could almost see these sort of movie reel pictures going through my mind as I was praying. And it was like, as I was seeing each one, they were real moments, really cringe moments I didn't want to revisit or see again. But this time I was seeing them as they were, as they'd just drawn me away from the one who loved me the most. And as I was crying and praying and felt this forgiveness that went right to the core of me, I was being drawn back into this family. And once I knew that forgiveness, it was totally personal. And I totally got that this remote idea of God was not remote at all. It was a trade, as Jesus had been on that cross. In the end, it does have to be personal, because as hard as it is for us to get our heads around, God does love us all uniquely. And when you hear the truth and it goes right to the core of you, you know that it's between you and him. And that is transforming of your whole life. It's the biggest blessing there is. So what do we do with that blessing? He doesn't give us grace and truth for us to keep it to ourselves. He gives it for us to share it. Now, in recent times, as we've seen today, there have been a few times when grace has needed to be shown, particularly in our homes, because those are the people we're with all the time. Particularly for those of us who've been homeschooling. I've got a few teacher friends, and actually most of them would say that teaching 30 children on Zoom is easier than teaching the one child sat in their house next to them. Do you know why that is? Because grace doesn't come easy. We often hold others to a higher standard than we even expect of ourselves. And grace means us laying down perfect and accepting those mistakes that people will make. If there was ever a greater picture of us all falling short, it's this moment, isn't it? With all these rules, we can so easily become judge and jury of our leaders, of our neighbours, of the people in the street. But instead, we could choose to be a blessing to those around us. Today is a new day. It says in Lamentations, his mercies are new every morning. So let's start today by accepting the grace of God in our lives and letting it overflow to the people around us, to the people in our own lives, but also maybe social media feed, something massive like that. We could show grace there too, couldn't we? And when it comes to the truth, our responsibility is to share it and to pray for it to settle in the hearts of those who hear it. Now, I say responsibility like it's a burden, but actually, when you're excited about the truth, it's a blessing to share it, isn't it? These things aren't hard to tell. They're great news. God places this truth about an eternal God into our hands, and he trusts us with the job of letting people know. We want people to know how blessed they are, don't we? He also sends his Holy Spirit for you, because actually it's not us that does the saving, but we can tell. In Romans 10 verse 14 it says, "But how can they call on him to save them unless they believe in him? And how can they believe in him if they've never heard about him? And how can they hear about him unless someone tells them?" What a privilege to be the bringer of truth to these children, to grandchildren, to friends and family, to someone who's struggling right now to find a way through each day. The best way we can do that is in our everyday. It's in everything we say and do. In Deuteronomy 6, Moses says to the people of Israel, "These commandments I give to you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up." He was encouraging them to have the law so imprinted on their hearts that they would teach it to generations. We need to have that truth imprinted on our hearts, don't we? We need to share it in all that we do. Band, if you'd like to come up now, that'd be great, thanks. So when I made this decision to follow Jesus at 21, I called my grandparents up and I told them I was getting baptised in a couple of weeks and the decision that I'd made. And these grandparents, these lovely grandparents who'd had me at chapel every week, who'd watched me walk away at 16, and in the years since leaving had listened to my stories of uni life and all the stuff I'd done, and probably knew all the stuff I didn't tell them as well. And I called them up, I was so excited. And my granddad, with this catch in his voice, said, "Oh, Carly, we've prayed for this every day since you were born." Wow. I mean, what? That is amazing. Every day since I was born, he'd given me the truth and I hadn't heard it or I hadn't wanted to hear it. But they had prayed and prayed for 21 years that truth would be real for me. We're going to sing a song in a minute that talks about those generations who are being prayed, who've been praying for you right now, who we can pray for today. We have the mantle. Let's pick it up. I'm just going to finish with this great story because you've probably heard it before, but I love it. It's a great illustration of all that we've talked about today's service. It says, "One day a man was walking along the beach when he noticed a boy picking something up and gently throwing it back into the ocean. Approaching the boy, he asked, 'What are you doing?' The boy replied, 'Throwing starfish back into the ocean. The surf is up and the tide is going out. If I don't throw them back, they'll die.' 'Son,' the man said, 'don't you realize there are miles and miles of beach and hundreds of starfish? You can't make a difference.' After listening politely, the boy bent down, picked up another starfish and threw it back into the surf. Then smiling at the man, he said, 'It made a difference for that one.'" We can be the ones that are praying and telling right now for these amazing children, for the many who are outside these walls who still haven't heard the truth, for the friends and neighbours who desperately need to know that there is a God who wants to bless. Let's think of the blessing that God can bring for each one that we tell.
The Lord bless you and keep
grace toward you. His favor be upon you
and 1,000 generations,
and your family, and your children,
their children, their children.
His favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. His presence go before you, and behind you, and beside you, all around you, and within you. He is with you, He is with you in the morning, in the evening, in your coming and your going, in your weeping and rejoicing. He is for you, 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 He is for you. His presence go before you, and behind you, and beside you, and around you, and within you. He is with you, He is with you in the morning, in the evening, in your coming and your going, in your weeping and rejoicing. He is for you, 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 He is for you.
Here's what's happening at Hope. So this coming Tuesday, we have got life groups as usual, which falls on the 16th. And it's extra special this week because it's life group prayer meeting. It is going to be different, it's going to be fun. So come and join in. It's going to be refreshing as well. So join us on Tuesday evening. Your life group pastors will be in touch with you regarding the details for that. Then on Wednesday, as usual, we have got coffee and catch up. If you haven't ever attended before, you are missing out. So bring your own coffee, bring your own biscuits, and come and join us and have fellowship and a giggle. And there's normally a joke as well in there. On Thursday, we have got Zoom prayer meeting at 8 p.m. in the evening. Now, if you haven't attended one, please get in touch with the office. They'll give you the details. It's a really special evening. Please join us and don't miss out on the Zoom prayer meeting on Thursday night. And finally, not forgetting, we have got Easter coming up. So we have a weekend of Easter celebration. So join us on Good Friday, which is the 2nd, and then on Easter Sunday, which is the 4th. Both days have got 9 and 11 o'clock experiences for all the family. Please come, please join us. We can't wait to see you. And for everything else, keep watching.